It is Kenshin Thursday once again, my friends. Thank you for being here, man. Episode 3 of the new RUROUNI KENSHIN series. Now, this is an episode that I would consider a character building and transitional episode. It's the kind of episode that you need to have in the beginning of a series that might not give you a lot of spectacle or flair or big crushing moments or anything like that, but is very, very important for the development of Yahiko's character, the relationship between Yahiko and Kaoru, the beginning of Kaoru teaching the Kamiya Kishin style to Yahiko, how Yahiko views Kenshin, how Kaoru's former students view her, basically just a lot of things that are happening between the dynamics of the characters that's very, very important to have. Also to note, this is great that this is following along with the manga. So I pulled the manga out once again to kind of double check, and in the last episode, they introduced Yahiko, the kid, the boy, young samurai, they introduced him a little bit early because he's actually introduced after Kenshin faces down the police swordsman in the manga, but his introduction didn't really kind of change the flow that much. And actually, in hindsight, I actually think it works a little bit better because Yahiko got to see firsthand what Kenshin could do, like physically with his skills, rather than just hearing about it or waiting until he was rescued, from the Yakuza. So I actually kind of like where they placed that. So this episode adapts the rest of Chapter 3 because Yahiko is introduced in Chapter 3 in the manga, and it also adapts all of Chapter 4, which is great because Chapter 5 is when things start to heat up. So again, this is one of those episodes that you really need just to kind of like gather the basis of who our characters are and bring them in all together. Yahiko has an interesting story here, and his character development goes on to be very, very good for the rest of the manga. Even further, so if you watch the 90s anime but haven't read the manga, even after where the 90s anime ends, Yahiko continues to go on in further development and become, a much better character than how he's introduced. And like I said in the last review, usually when a lot of these kind of arrogant child characters show up in media, not just anime and manga, but like in anything, even in like a movie, I usually am just very, very annoyed by like the arrogant child archetype, right? But with Yahiko, it really works. And it really works because of what you're going to see happen to him and what is going to become of him as the story goes on, which I will not spoil. But I want to say that if you get the inclination that you think this character might be super annoying and that you might hate this character, I guarantee you, take it from somebody that generally hates child characters that are like this, you will love Yahiko, all right? You will love Yahiko as time goes on. But at first he is very snarky because he has the sense of pride within him because of how he views his parents, but then there is also the harsh reality of what could have actually happened to his parents, and we don't really know the absolute truth, and I kind of like that, where Yahiko views his parents, very honorable, and did everything that they could to keep him alive, which I'm sure is true, but the Yakuza says to Yahiko, they mentioned that, his father died, he was just murdered, whatever, and then his mother became a whore and all this stuff. So, they mention all these things and died of diseases with that. In the manga, they specifically say syphilis and stuff. So, it's all these things to kind of taunt and tease and, put Yahiko in his place and try to make him seem insignificant. There's probably, a large amount of truth that is involved with that, but at the same time, it's a fear tactic, it's a ploy, it's a manipulation tool to keep Yahiko in line, to keep him under the submission of what the Yakuza is telling him to do, right? And I think it works very well to see Yahiko rebel against that, especially after he saw Kenshin kind of stand up for himself, because he views himself as a samurai. He has no proper training, right? But because of his father and because of just how he views himself and what he wants to be, and he has that within him, right? And so seeing kind of Kenshin rebel against these authority figures that were oppressing people, I think works to help inspire Yahiko in this moment to do the same thing, regardless of what's going to happen to him. And a lot of the, honor and integrity of like the samurai, right? Or at least the idealized version of it that we think of, and the type of it that's praised, is being willing to die for your beliefs, being willing to die for doing the right thing or what you believe is the right thing. So Yahiko, even though he's a child, even though he has no training, he's defenseless, he is willing to die in this moment for standing up for his parents, which I think is a really, really interesting aspect to begin his character arc with. And then, of course, Kenshin shows up and saves him very handily. Once again, we are still within the realm of the Kenshin story, where Kenshin is just going to beat the ever-living shit out of everybody. There's no one that can stand up to Kenshin at this point in the story. And these Yakuza guys are nothing. I love when the one guy starts to talk and Kenshin just smashes him into the ceiling, and he's like, yo, I wasn't done talking yet. And in the 90s version, I think the line was a little bit colder. He's just like, I wasn't finished speaking. But this version was good too. So I liked it. And when he takes Yahiko, I like how the leader of the Yakuza, isn't quite full of shit, because he sees Kenshin and he sees that look in his eyes, and he's like, listen, you guys, like, no, you're good. Don't fight him. Like, if all he wants to do is take one kid away from us, like, we got off easy, man. So I kind of like that. And seeing how the Yakuza boss views Kenshin, because even though he doesn't look intimidating himself, you can tell that, like, just seeing a man like Kenshin and looking into his eyes, and probably, the Yakuza boss looks older, so he's probably been around since the war, since the revolution. He's seen men like this before, and he's just like, don't fuck with Kenshin, all right? So then the next half of the episode basically covers chapter 4 of the manga, and this is our transitional moment where Yahiko's being brought on as a student. Again, it might not be the most exciting episode to watch, but I think it tells us a lot of important things. It tells us that because of Kaoru's reputation being tarnished in episode 1, that means that all of her students have left, and they have not come back. And a few of them tried to come back, but they thought they were going to be taught by Kenshin. So basically, everybody is either afraid of the reputation from before, even though she's been proven innocent, but also doesn't believe in Kaoru's style. And a large part of that is probably because she specifically uses wooden swords as opposed to real ones. People want to learn like real swordsmanship. So they say it's a swordsmanship style that is based upon protection and defense, which is, again, in this world, that we're living in right now in Kenshin, it's another idealized thing, where Kenshin even self-admitted that all swordsmanship is basically learning how to kill, and that's the truth. However, looking at Kaoru's point of view and her style of swordsmanship, this is something I would like to believe in. This is something I would like to have be true, So maybe pushing for that, even though things aren't perfect in the world, pushing towards the kind of world that you would like to see is sort of like what Kenshin wants to do. But simply because of the type of sword style that Kaoru does, obviously Yahiko is not interested either. He also wants to learn from Kenshin. He also wants to use real swords, so he's not about it, and we're going to have this sort of like almost sibling dynamic between these two characters, where Yahiko is very reluctantly the student of Kaoru, and Kaoru is trying her best to actually like be the head of this school, live in her father's reputation. So you have that also from both of these characters. You have Kaoru trying to live up to the expectations that her father left behind, and Yahiko trying to live up to how he viewed his father in his mind. So you have that dynamic happening at the same time, and because of that, they work very well as sort of like almost sibling-like characters. And you also see the disrespect from her former students that started this kind of, started this fight with this gang that they really shouldn't have messed with to begin with. Now, I don't know a lot about this part of Japanese history and culture and whatnot, but I did find it interesting that in the manga, the gang that they fight, the ones with the cannon, on their cloaks, they have kind of whatever like the swastika symbol was. I don't know if it's kind of... Sorry, I don't know. That's having a hard time focusing. But they basically have that symbol on their cloaks. And unless I missed it, I think they took that out of the anime version. So I wonder if that was purely due to some kind of censorship or for another reason. But just an interesting factoid that I noticed. I also think something that this anime version has not really done enough of, that I think they need to emphasize more, is Kenshin's sword. Now, he has like the Sakabato, which basically means a reverse-bladed sword. So if you have a sword... Didn't I used to have a sword right down here? I don't know where my sword is right now. I used to have a sword in this room. All I got is this machete, which I can't really demonstrate on. Well, I guess maybe I can. All right, so like obviously a regular katana is going to be sharp on the curved side, but instead of having the saw like the machete, it's dull on the backside. Kenshin's sword is the opposite. So the curved side is dull, but the back side is still sharp. So if you're wondering how he says the sword can't kill people, and then he can still cut a cannonball in half, well, if he uses the back of the sword, it's still sharp. The idea is you wouldn't use a katana backwards because that would just be it would go against the design of the sword itself, and it wouldn't make sense whatsoever. So the front side is dull. Now, obviously, once again, you got to take a suspension of disbelief because if you hit somebody really hard with something dull, you could still like seriously injure them and probably kill them. But this is fantasy, all right? It's based in historical truths, but it's a fictional story, all right? So we'll go with it. I will allow, just like how I will pretend that Batman doesn't kill anybody when he punches them like right in the face. I'll just pretend Kenshin doesn't kill anybody when he hits them with a blunt object. But the point is, there still is a sharp side of the sword if he wants to use it. So in case anybody was curious, it was like, I thought Kenshin's sword couldn't cut things. It can, but you'd have to use it backwards. So the man drew his sword and lifted it up and cut a cannonball in half within a couple of seconds using the sword backwards. Just saying, Kenshin's a badass. But the most exciting part of this episode for me, as somebody who knows the Kenshin story fairly well, is the introduction of Sanosuke at the very end as the tease. If you waited till after the credits, there is a little moment of Kenshin beating the crap out of these gang members, which I think in the manga they were not the same gang members. I think they were just people like on the street, just street thugs. I don't know, I can't remember. But Sanosuke, man. Sanosuke is one of our greatest characters in the entire Kenshin manga. I don't want to spoil anything about him for any newcomers, but I will say that Sanosuke is going to be a great addition, my friends. And if you thought this episode was a little slow or wasn't quite your style, I guarantee you, when Sanosuke enters the fold, things are going to shift, man, and shift in a good way. So anyways, guys, if you watched episode 3 of Rurouni Kenshin, the new series, let me know what you think about it down below. Leave your comments, thoughts, and opinions. Very curious for what anime-onlys and people that have never read Kenshin or watched the 90s series think about this. That's kind of the thing I'm going to be most curious about, and I'm going to try very hard to not spoil things in these reviews, and if I do, it's pretty much just going to be like a little tease of something that's coming up. I'm not going to like outright spoil like a huge event, but I might be like, oh, pay attention to this character, or, you know, like I said, Yahiko's character development, like, don't worry, you're going to love him. So beyond that, guys, thanks for watching this review. I do appreciate it. Give it a thumbs up and a comment if you enjoyed it. Other than that, check out the links in the description. I have Patreon. I have a channel memberships, turn on, merch store, all that stuff. If you want to help support the channel, I'd really appreciate it if you did so. I also have all the various social media links where you can follow me, and I'll see you next week for fucking Sanosuke.